So welcome. This month is Sustainability Month. So today we are going to start our section on creating a sustainable future. And there are all sorts of different aspects of sustainability that we will get into. Next slide. Okay. So what do some of you think sustainability is? Besides the things that I've already said. Anybody want to be brave and drop anything in the chat of what you think sustainability is?
I think sustainability is basically meeting each other's needs and what we want and what we want to reduce. Basically adapting and mitigation. I think that's how you say it. And not only for our current generations, but for many generations, like you said.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, adaptation and mitigation. Those are excellent, excellent terms that are used when we're talking about climate change. There's climate adaptation, where we know it's going to change, so we have to just move along with it. And then there's climate mitigation, where we are trying to make sure that we put fewer greenhouse gases out into the atmosphere and actually try to slow the process of climate change. Both of them are very, very critical because we're going to need both, right, as we move forward into the future. And the truth is that there is one, but there is no one thing that is sustainability. Like if you say, I want to be more sustainable, you can't just switch on or off a switch and have it be sustainable, right? It's sustainability is more like a process of looking at everything to see what you can and cannot do better. So that might be confusing, but let's move on, and hopefully it'll get a little clearer. So that's why I said there isn't one definition, but there kind of is one definition, and it's this definition. It's the Brundtland Report's definition. And so this, for the longest time, and continues to be the guiding definition of what sustainable development is. So, and so again, it's this idea of it's development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This idea of the 7 generations beyond. That's why 7th generation cleaning products has the name it has. So this is really what we're talking about, is that we're not saying that we have to suddenly go live in the forest and have nothing, right? But we are talking about not consuming so much so that it takes away resources from other people. Because ultimately, when we are talking about equity, this becomes access to resources is also an equity issue. So if we make our lives a little bit less dependent on some of these resources, or reimagine our resources in different ways, then we look at scarcity from a different perspective. So we're going to start to dive into this a little bit more here. So what does this actually mean? So what are resources? Go ahead, unmute yourself or throw it in the chat. What do you think is a resource of things that we need or that we have? I'll give you a hint. Yeah, Yadi, food, water. What else? Cough, cough, cough. Right, so there we go, oxygen. So it's the air we breathe, it's water, it's food, it's everything. It's It's trees, it's wood, it's resources are what we have. Christian, this is a click through. And then we use those resources for what we make. And then what we make then goes into our lifestyle, right? And that's how we use the things that we use them, right? So it could have been a tree, but then it gets milled and now it's a notebook. And then how I use it is I write down important things and then what happens to it. So at the end of that, click it again, please. Yeah, it becomes a resource. So what do I do with this? Well, if I have paper and I don't want it anymore, I can recycle it. And recycled paper could become bath tissue or another notebook or something else. So it's thinking about not only how we're using things and what we're using, but also what do we do with things at the end of our useful life with them?
Hi guys! Do you have time for a few quick questions? I see you're having a lot of fun, but do you ever stop and think if what you do is sustainable? And do you know what sustainable development means? Sustainable development is to make the world a better place for everyone now without destroying the possibilities for the next generations. If you wonder if something is sustainable, you can ask yourself, can we do this over and over again forever? Sustainable development means that we need to keep three things in mind at once: social progress, economic development, and climate and environment. First of all, we have to take care of our planet. We have many natural ecosystems that must be in balance in order for us to live here. The climate system is one of them. This system ensures that the temperature is correct and that the atmosphere emits exactly the right amount of solar energy. When we emit harmful greenhouse gases, such as CO2, we clog the atmosphere. This changes the temperatures on Earth, which again affects our development. How we produce and use energy is incredibly important. Oil and coal are examples of energy we may run out of. Water, wind, and sun, however, will always be here. Using the lasting sources of energy that renew themselves is good for the planet and can provide jobs for years to come. Economics. Almost everything we develop, buy, and trade starts with nature. The smarter we use our natural resources and the better systems we create for a fair distribution, the more sustainable we are. One way to contribute to a more uneven distribution is to be more aware of what we buy and how it is produced. A football is a good example. It travels far before it reaches the football players. First, the materials are made. Then, they print the logo somewhere else before a third country sews it all together. One single football sees the whole world before it reaches its goal. This journey ties us together. If we are to win the battle for a sustainable future, we have to play with fair rules that applies to everyone. Social progress. We humans are part of nature, but we're also important resources for the world. Just like water, the forest, and the sun, we have minds that can create the strangest and most creative things. But for us to be the best versions of ourselves, there are certain things that must be in order, like having equal opportunities to education, safety, food, and medicine. This provides greater opportunities for us as human beings, but also for the planet. We just have to think in new ways. These three must work together. That is sustainable development. And there is actually a plan for this. All the countries of the United Nations have agreed on a joint plan for sustainable development. But for the plan to work, we need to cooperate, and we need you to be on board. Are you with us?
So show of thumbs up in the chat. Has anyone heard of Sustainable Development Goals prior to this? Has anyone heard of the United Nations? Okay. So maybe, okay, great, thank you. So the United Nations is really, it's just a group of countries that have gotten together and said, let's try to coordinate. And so one of the things that they have really pushed is making sure that these sustainable development goals. So remember, we talked about sustainable, say that 10 times fast. Sustainable development is about development that will meet the current generation's needs without without preventing future generations from being able to meet their own needs. So if we put goals around that, then basically what we're trying to do is center equally people, planet, and profit. So sometimes it's called the triple bottom line, or the triple P's, because it's people, planet, and profit. And so it's this idea of the people are the community, the education, the equity, social resources, quality of life, things that that your school does particularly well, and where we're kind of interacting with all of you. And then also the planet is how we are all interacting together, right? So environmental, natural resources, air and water quality, conservation, all sorts of that thing. And so then where those overlap is to create a bearable planet, right? That will be good for people, it will be good for the planet, but it might not necessarily be sustainable. So then that's when they're adding in profit, and they're saying dealing with the finances of making all of this work. And so that's where we start getting into bringing in equity, and also then making it this circle in the middle of sustainability. And so this image was first used by John Elkington, the founder of a sustainability consultancy firm. And so this is not only for businesses, but this is also for organizations as they're moving forward, looking at these three different bottom lines, so that you are really thinking about people and the impacts on the planet as the same time as you're talking about sort of the business side of things, to create a more socially responsible supply chain and product chain through our lives and through our economies. So in addition, Elkington combined a third concern, and that was that companies also needed to measure their environmental impact. And so that is why that businesses are now getting involved in this, to really look at the triple bottom line. So this next slide actually breaks us down into the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN lays out. And so in 1972, there was a meeting in Stockholm in Sweden, to really look at the environment. And so they wanted to look at how impact on the environment and how it was related to economic development. And so in this first meeting, a lot of the goals were to find a common outlook and common principles to inspire and guide the world's population to preserve the sort of the human environment. And so these goals are things like no poverty, no hunger, good health and well-being, because we know that if people have enough and clean water and sanitation. Because we know that if people have the right healthy water, access to water and sanitation, access to food, and they're not hungry, then we can start talking about whether or not that tree needs to be planted here or here, right? So it's really about making sure that everybody on this planet has been provided for and is being brought along, and that no one is being left behind. That also includes education and gender equality, affordable and clean energy. There's a lot of initiatives in this to get solar panels out to rural farm areas in developing countries, so that they don't even have to have wires. They can just go directly to their own solar panels, so that they don't have to worry about a grid, essentially, or they make small microgrids. If any of you are familiar with the point, there was talk after Sandy of making the microgrid, and I think they still are, is that creating that area as both a cooling center and a refuge center, but also a place that would create some electricity so that the neighbors could tap into that electricity should another big event like that cause power outages in the area. But this is also, so once these basic needs are kind of, now we're talking about decent work and economic growth, industry innovation, in better infrastructure, reducing inequalities, making our cities and our communities more sustainable, responsible consumption and production. And that's what we're going to get into more now. And you can start to see it. You see how it's not only circular, but it's an infinity sign. So that'll get you kind of thinking about what we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And then number 13, climate action. Gotta worry about our fishy friends on life below water, but also life on land. Peace, justice, and strong institutions, and then partnerships. So really working together and recognizing that partners are critical to these goals. Next slide, please. And I think, oh yeah, that's right. So what are some examples of sustainable development? Call them out, throw them in the chat. We've talked about them a little bit. Like, how are we going to get energy into our homes? One way. That's not coal or oil.
I can share what my grandparents did.
Okay.
My grandfather paid to have solar panels installed on his roof about 7 years ago, I think.
That's amazing. And how much energy does that give him?
I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure that well, it's just my grandmother now, and she uses so little power that I think they feed to the grid.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yep.
Yeah, Jasmine, renewable energy, exactly. So that can be in the form of, this is applicable through Christian.
Can you explain that about the grid? What it?
Yeah, exactly. So when we plug something into the wall and our phone magically charges, that's because there's a little bit more than magic that has to happen. All of those lines that you see outside, sometimes they're buried under the ground, are bringing electricity from big power plants. And what they do usually at these power plants is they burn coal, so really hard pressed. You can, maybe sometimes you've seen it barbecuing in a grill. You've seen the little black charcoal briquettes. That's like what coal is. So it's really old compressed organic matter. So you can burn that, and that's how we make electricity. or there's gas. You can burn gas in the same sort of way that you burn coal, but all of that gives off things like extra carbon dioxide or extra methane or extra nitrogen or extra sulfur, or all of these things that really we don't want them in our air, because they're actually messing up the proportion of what we need to breathe. But then also in the same way that, if you've ever been to a greenhouse or like a nursery or something, and sometimes you see where the little baby plants are kept, and it's really hot and it's covered in glass. Even if it's like a cold winter's day, it's usually pretty warm in there. That's exactly what our atmosphere does around our Earth. And so the more chemicals that shouldn't be up there that we put up there, basically the hotter and hotter and hotter we're getting. It's like essentially we're making the glass of our greenhouse thicker, so heat can't escape, and that's why it stays inside, and we're seeing climate change. And so when we're talking about the grid, is we're talking about like the power companies then send the power out on the lines, and then the lines come into our homes, and then we pay the power companies so that we can plug our stuff in and our phones magically charge up. Does that make sense? Can I get a thumbs up if that makes sense? Or if there are more questions, let me know. Got a 1 thumbs up. Yes, okay, great, perfect. So when we're talking about, thank you. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about solar panels, we're talking about green infrastructure. So like the conservation that we do around the Bronx River. And solar panels are basically big panels that catch the sun's rays and convert that to energy. In the same way that wind does that, and it converts it to energy. And then that is actually getting put through the lines and then coming into our houses. And then we pay the other power companies that give us the solar and the wind, as opposed to the gas and the coal and the oil. And so that's ways that you can help support that industry. So, and then there's other, and then go ahead, Christian, thanks. And then there's also farming, right? There's different ways that we can farm better, with different rotations, with different buffer crops. And then there are things that we can do in our homes, like installing a low flow shower head, so that even though you may still take your shower, your 10-15 minute shower, you are going to be using less water each time. And the beautiful thing about sustainable development, and just more sustainable, choosing more sustainable things, is that usually it ends up being cheaper. Because if you're using less water over time and you have to pay for the water, you are eventually going to pay less and less and less. Although there is sometimes it costs a little extra to get set up first. But people have been using the power of the wind and the sun for millennia. And now we've just found more things to tap into that. And in terms of green spaces, such as parks, wetlands, lakes, forests, Bronx River, and other ecosystems like this, they are fundamental to sustainably developed urban areas and are essential for cooling cities. And the trees produce oxygen and filter out air pollution. So well-designed green spaces also play a critical role in providing safer routes for those commuting by foot or bicycle, and providing safer spaces for physical activity and recreation. So why do you think we need sustainability? I mean, we've kind of been talking about this, right? Because we can't oh, and I want to drop this in the chat when we get there. There's a way that you can look at your own consumption and sort of see where you might be able to consume just a little bit less. So the simple answer for why do we need sustainability is because we have a finite amount of space. You know, the word finite, it's limited. We have a limited amount of space and we have only a certain amount of resources. And technology can only provide the fix so far, right? It can't provide all of the fixes. So there is something known as the tragedy of the commons. And oh, I see, she quoted me. How you choose to behave is how the environment will be for everyone. So here's a tragedy of the commons video, and hopefully you enjoy.
Imagine as a thought experiment that you live in a small village and depend on the local fish pond for food. You share the pond with 3 other villagers. The pond starts off with a dozen fish, and the fish reproduce. For every 2 fish, there will be 1 baby added each night. So, in order to maximize your supply of
Sorry, I'm having internet problems.
food, how many fish should you catch each day? Take a moment to think about it. Assume baby fish grow to full size immediately and that the pond begins at full capacity, and ignore factors like the sex of the fish you catch. The answer? 1. And it's not just you. The best way to maximize every villager's food supply is for each fisherman to take just 1 fish each day. Here's how the math works. If each villager takes 1 fish, there will be 8 fish left overnight. Each pair of fish produces 1 baby, and the next day the pond will be fully restocked with 12 fish. If anyone takes more than 1, the number of reproductive pairs drops, and the population won't be able to bounce back. Eventually, it will be gone, leaving all 4 villagers to starve. This fish pond is just one example of a classic problem called the tragedy of the commons. The phenomenon was first described in a pamphlet by economist William Forster Lloyd in 1833 in a discussion of the overgrazing of cattle on village common areas. More than 100 years later, ecologist Garrett Hardin revived the concept to describe what happens when many individuals all share a limited resource, like grazing land, fishing areas, living space, even clean air. Hardin argued that these situations pit short-term self-interest against the common good.
Do you want me to share it, Christian?
Maybe. Yeah. Should I stop sharing?
Sure. Let's see if I can get it. Sorry, y'all.
It just buffered a little bit. I'm gonna see if I can keep going.
Okay.
Pit short-term self-interest against the common good, and they end badly for everyone, resulting in overgrazing, overfishing, overpopulation, pollution, and other social and environmental problems. The key feature of a tragedy of the commons is that it provides an opportunity for an individual to benefit him or herself while spreading out any negative effects across the larger population. To see what that means, let's revisit our fish pond. Each individual fisherman is motivated to take as many fish as he can for himself. Meanwhile, any decline in fish reproduction is shared by the entire village. Anxious to avoid losing out to his neighbors, a fisherman will conclude that it's in his best interest to take an extra fish, or two, or three. Unfortunately, this is the same conclusion reached by the other fishermen, and that's the tragedy. Optimizing for the self in the short term isn't optimal for anyone in the long term. That's a simplified example, but the tragedy of the commons plays out in the more complex systems of real life, too. The overuse of antibiotics has led to short-term gains in livestock production and in treating common illnesses. But it's also resulted in the evolution of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which threaten the entire population. A coal-fired power plant produces cheap electricity for its customers and profits for its owners. These local benefits are helpful in the short term. But pollution from mining and burning coal is spread across the entire atmosphere and sticks around for thousands of years. There are other examples too. Littering, water shortages, deforestation, traffic jams, even the purchase of bottled water. But human civilization has proven it's capable of doing something remarkable. We form social contracts, we make communal agreements, we elect governments, and we pass laws. All this to save our collective selves from our own individual impulses. It isn't easy, and we certainly don't get it right nearly all of the time. But humans, at our best, have shown that we can solve these problems, and we can continue to do so if we remember Hardin's lesson. When the tragedy of the commons applies, what's good for all of us is good for each of us. TED-Ed is a nonprofit. If you value our work, please consider supporting it on
I really like that video. I think it is really good. It explains it super well. So what are some sustainable solutions to the issues that we've presented? And what are some things that you would suggest that should be changed in your neighborhood? Like what's jumping out at you, in terms of what could be different? I mean, so Christian shared his story of his grandparents put solar panels on their house and now use so little electricity that basically they can sell it back to the power company and the power company will give them money. What other things that could we do you think, to improve your neighborhood? What do you see that could be improved in your area?
For me, I would say the litter.
Litter?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So, Christian, let's go to this next one since I know we're coming up on time, because that is perfect. So, there are different types of, there's names for all of this, right? Because there's always names for things. So there's the circular economy, the recycling economy, and the linear economy. And so that's the one that we're used to, right? This, you take it, you make it, you use it, you waste it. And then we have to figure out, what do we do with our garbage, right? And so that's when we make a lot of landfills and things. In recycling, we take a little bit out of that, right? And we say, well, we can deal with some plastic and most of the paper and most of the metal. But yeah, there are going to be a lot of people who don't participate as well. And so that is taking from we've still extracted the resources, right? So we've taken it out of the environment. We've made it into something. We've used it. And now we're just sort of making a little circle between use, recycle, make, use, recycle, make, and it's making a little bit of a circle economy, but there's still waste coming out of this that doesn't have anywhere to go. But when we're talking about a circular economy, we're talking about it never goes out of the system. There is no like, and then you put it in a plastic bag and you leave it out for the garbage people to take and it magically goes away, because there is no magically going away anywhere. It has to go somewhere, and it usually ends up in the communities that have the least amount of power to fight it. So it ends up in disproportionately lower income or communities of color or immigrant communities. And that's where we get a lot of these like landfills and garbage recycling and garbage transfer stations and things like that. But if we don't even have garbage, there is no need for a garbage transfer station. And if we take this waste and we put it back into the economy, then there are jobs related around this repair, reuse, right? There's the reduce, reuse, recycle. And a lot of people know that in terms of the R's, but there's also repair, reuse, refuse, so you don't even take it in the first place, return if you can. So there's a lot of creativity that we can really get into around this idea of the circular economy, and to design out different waste solutions. We can get into that more next time, and we'll get into more of like the green infrastructure and solar panels and all of that next time. I also want to talk about trees, your street tree assessment homework assignment next time. We'll go over then. So we're going to talk more about the plants. We talked more about the industrial today. And don't forget digital scrapbooks. Most of your homework assignments look good. I'm going to dig them into that a little bit more next week. And I will get you some feedback on them. Your social animal assignments are adorable. And so that was a fun treat. So if you hadn't had a chance to turn them in yet, please look at your homework assignments so you don't have everything due at the end of the semester. And then we've got your digital scrapbooks for the last day, which will be May 27th, I believe.
Also, Michelle, can you maybe send me an email, like with what everyone is missing, so that I can forward it to Nancy?
So if you don't want to get tracked down for what you're missing, I would suggest turning it in, because otherwise Inelda and I will both come after you and say, please turn this in. We want to hear from you. And I'll get you some feedback. What?
That I wouldn't want to tell Yancy, because then Yancy will get on them. They know that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I will follow up with you more then. But until then, start thinking about, it's nice weather, so you might want to do your street tree assessment. But if you're confused about it, we'll go over it next week so that you have a little bit more clarity on what that assignment is. And as you're walking around this next week, I would challenge you to think about ways that your lived community, so like around your house, around your school, around your commute to and from, start looking at it with a critical eye and think about how maybe with some ingenuity or creativity, or even just a little bit of resources to make it happen, you could create more sustainability in your own neighborhood. So start thinking about ideas for that, and come ready to discuss things next week, because I'm itching to have a conversation with you. So thank you, and have a lovely rest of your Friday and a great weekend.
Bye.
And Jasmine, felicitaciones. And I hope you get to see that baby soon.
Yeah. Seriously.
Thank you.
Oh, felicidades. I'm sorry. Felicidades.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.